Stars explode in the quiet night.
Chapter 1: The Twilight Belt. The silence of the void was a lie. Dr. Aris Thorne had learned this lesson on a dozen worlds, in 100 different alien skis. True silence was a rarity in the universe. Even in the vacuum, there was the hum of the ship, the thrum of your own blood, the ghost sound of memory. But here, in geosynchronous orbit above Ignis Secundus, the lie felt more profound than ever. He stared at the stark division on the Whisper's main viewport. To the left, the planet's dayside was a panorama of celestial violence. Oceans of molten rock churned, their surfaces scarred by continents of burning slag. The atmosphere was a shroud of superheated plasma, glowing white-hot under the relentless, invisible fury of the forged star. It was a neutron star, a cosmic corpse that refused to die quietly, pulsing with dangerous, exotic radiation that would cook a man in his suit in seconds. To the right, the night side was an abyss. It was a land of absolute zero, where the very air had frozen solid, forming continent-sized glaciers of nitrogen and methane that reflected no light, only swallowed it. It was a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight, a void pressing against the fragile bubble of the ship. And between these two hells, clinging to the razor's edge of impossibility, stretched the Twilight Belt. "Whisper, confirm habitable zone parameters one last time," Aris murmured, his voice a low rasp in the quiet bridge. "This place looks marginal even for us." A soft, gender-neutral voice, synthesized to be calm and devoid of alarm, filled the cabin. "Confirmed. Twilight Belt width, 212 kilometers at its widest point. Surface temperature gradient, 450 degrees Celsius at the day edge to negative 210 degrees Celsius at the night edge. A habitable niche exists within vast, interconnected subsurface cavern systems. Geothermal activity counteracts radiative cooling, creating stable thermal pockets. Atmosphere thin, sulfur-rich, breathable with standard filters. Gravity 1.1 g primary biosphere subsurface. Probability of complex silicon-based life 94.7%. Aris ran a hand through his short-cropped, graying hair. A 1.1 g gravity well. His knees were already complaining. Silicon-based, tough little bugs. Caverns it is then. He felt the oppressive weight of the celestial furnace on one side and the icy, entropic void on the other, a sensation that was more psychological than physical, but no less real. Plot a descent trajectory. Land us near that large thermal vent signature on the day edge fringe. Designate it Ember Moor. Ember Moor confirmed. Initiating descent protocols. Brace for turbulence. The Whisper, a ship built for solo survey missions and shaped like a stooping hawk, pivoted and began its plunge. The transition into the upper atmosphere was a violent, shuddering affair. They were hitting the planet where its two extreme climates collided, a permanent war zone of superheated air and freezing downdrafts. The ship was buffeted by atmospheric shear that would have torn a lesser vessel to shreds. Warning indicators flashed amber, then faded as the ship's stabilizers fought for control. Aris watched the viewport as the desolate landscape of the Twilight Belt rushed up to meet him. It was a rocky, scarred wasteland caught in perpetual dusk. The ground was a mosaic of cracked basalt and frozen gases, lit by the faint, reflected glow from the dayside inferno. Ahead, the Ember Moor yawned open, a jagged, weeping fissure in the planet's crust, billowing plumes of superheated steam that glowed with a faint, hellish red from the light of the magma far below. The Whisper slipped inside, its powerful forward lights stabbing into the darkness. They navigated a treacherous labyrinth of tunnels, the walls narrowing and then opening into vast, unseen spaces. The only other light was the dull, pulsating red emanating from the planet's deep, wounded heart. The air inside the cavern was thick with particulates, making the light beams seem solid. After a tense, silent minutes of navigation, the ship settled with a final, grinding shudder onto a relatively stable ledge overlooking a colossal cavern. Landing sequence complete, all systems nominal. External environment hostile, suit integrity mandatory. Aris stood, his body feeling heavier in the increased gravity, and moved to the airlock. The inner door hissed shut behind him, and after a cycle that replaced the ship's air with the thin, external atmosphere, the outer door opened. The heat hit him like a physical blow. It was intense, dry, and carried the scent of a forge, hot stone, ozone, and something acrid, like overheated electronics. His suit's environmental controls whined in protest, struggling to compensate. He took a cautious step onto the ledge, his mag boots gripping the rough, volcanic rock. The scale of the cavern was breathtaking, a subterranean cathedral whose ceiling was lost in a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow light. The walls were dark, volcanic basalt, veined with pulsating, liquid lines of magma that cast the entire chamber in an eerie, shifting red glow. It was like standing inside a living, breathing creature. Below, perhaps 100 meters down, a river flowed. It wasn't water. It moved with a sluggish, heavy grace, its surface a perfect, shimmering mirror that reflected the magma veins with a cold, metallic sheen. A gallium alloy stream, he guessed, a liquid metal flow kept molten by the geothermal heat. But it wasn't the heat or the scale or the river of metal that captivated him. It was the sound. A constant, complex vibration hummed through the rock under his feet, resonated in the air around his helmet, a symphony of deep, subsonic booms that he felt in his bones, high-pitched whistles that teased the edge of his hearing, grinding groans of shifting rock, and a pervasive, rhythmic clicking. Whisper, are you reading this seismic activity? Negative, vibrations are resonant, not tectonic. Source is a combination of geothermal venting, fluid flow through restricted channels, and biological origins. Scanning. Biological. Aris moved cautiously to the edge of the ledge, his handlight sweeping the cavern floor. The beam caught a cluster of movement near the metallic river. He zoomed in his helmet display. Creatures, insectoid, about the size of large dogs, scuttling across a basalt outcrop. Their bodies were composed of dark, interlocking plates that looked like obsidian and polished silicon, gleaming in the light. They had multiple, multi-jointed legs that tapped against the rock with a sharp, precise rhythm. Silica skitters. As they moved, their collective tapping created a staccato percussion that echoed through the chamber, seeming to weave itself into the deeper groans and whistles of the cavern, creating a strange, unintended harmony. He focused his wrist-mounted bioscanner on one. The data streamed onto his HUD. Subject silica skitter, composition primarily silicon carbide trace metals. Internal anatomy reveals complex, hollow structures. Hypothesis, resonance chambers. Communication and spatial awareness likely achieved via complex sonic emission and reception. They're not just living here, Aris whispered, a thrill of discovery cutting through his weariness. They're part of it. They're musicians in the planet's orchestra. He activated the bioscanner's advanced acoustic module, tasking it to map the cavern's vibrational signature. The display on his HUD bloomed into a complex, three-dimensional, ever-shifting waveform. It was beautiful, a dance of energy and sound. It's not random noise, whisper, look at the patterns, repeating sequences, mathematically significant intervals. It's a language of pressure and vibration. Confirmed, the acoustic environment exhibits a high degree of structured complexity. Preliminary correlation analysis shows an 87.3% match between certain low-frequency motifs and fluctuations in geothermal pressure readings from the Ember Moor. Further correlation with gallium stream flow rates. Hypothesis: the resonance is a planetary status report, a real-time sonic manifestation of the core's activity. You could call it a song of the core. Aris stood there for a long time, listening not with just his ears, but with his entire body. The deep booms were the planet's heartbeat. The whistles were its breath, forced through stone lungs. The groans were the creak of its tectonic joints, and the skitters' clicks were the chatter of its inhabitants, living their lives to the rhythm of a world that was very much alive. He had come to Ignis Secundus to catalogue exotic life forms and extreme geology. He had expected a silent, dead world save for the fury of its surface. He had not expected to find a world that sang. He looked out over the cavern, at the river of liquid metal, the pulsating magma veins, the skittering silicon life forms, and he felt a profound sense of intrusion. He was an outsider, a single, soft-fleshed note in a symphony of stone and fire. Log entry: Dr. Aris Thorne, Exobiology Survey Mission 7 Epsilon. He began, recording his thoughts. I have made planetfall in the Ember Caverns of Ignis Secundus. Initial findings exceed all expectations. The dominant life forms are silicon-based, and they, along with the geothermal activity, generate a complex resonant vibration that permeates the environment. It is a soundscape of immense power and complexity. My primary objective is to study this phenomenon, to understand if it is mere byproduct or something more. He paused, watching a shriek stalker, a six-legged predator he'd identified from orbit, move with liquid grace along a far wall, its body vibrating subtly as if listening to a frequency he could not hear. I have a theory, Whisper, he said softly. I don't think they just live in the song, I think they live because of it. This resonance, it might be fundamental to their biology, their ecology, everything. Hypothesis is logical, further data required. Then let's go get it, Aris said, a smile touching his lips for the first time since entering orbit. The oppressive heat now felt like a vital energy, the crushing gravity a firm hand. The symphony of echoes was no longer alien, it was an invitation. The planet was speaking, and Dr. Aris Thorne was finally learning how to listen. Chapter 2: The Symphony of Stone and Silicon. The days that followed were a descent into a living geology text. Aris established a routine, using the Whisper as his base camp and venturing out in increasingly wider arcs, his senses and sensors attuned to the planet's perpetual song. His first discovery was a forest of sorts. He named them the Pious Spires. They weren't organic, but towering, heat-resistant crystalline formations that grew from the cavern floor like petrified trees. Their structures a complex lattice of boron carbide and corundum. They hummed with a constant, high-pitched tone as the geothermal winds blew through their needle-like branches, acting as natural Aeolian harps. The skitters navigated these forests with reverence, their clicks seeming to change pitch and rhythm in response to the spire's song. Whisper said, hypothesis, the pious spires act as frequency modulators and amplifiers for the core resonance. The skitters may use them for long-range communication. Not just communication, Whisper, Aris corrected, watching a group of skitters pause at the base of a particularly large spire, their tapping becoming slow and deliberate. That looks like reverence, or at least acknowledgement. He continued, mapping tributaries of the Gallium stream and discovering the creatures that fed on them. The alloy ruminants were massive, slow-moving beasts encased in segmented volcanic rock armor. They moved with a glacial pace, their multiple heads dipping into the metallic flow, sifting out trace minerals with specialized filter-like mouthparts. The sound they produced was a deep, grinding rumble, the vibration of stone on stone, a bass note in the cavern's symphony. But for every grazer, there was a predator. He first saw the shriek stalkers in action near a roaring geothermal vent he dubbed a forge mouth. A mist of superheated steam and vaporized metals billowed from a fissure, creating a permanent, shimmering haze. A skitter, separated from its pack, was skittering along a narrow ledge. From the haze above, a shadow dropped. The stalker was a masterpiece of lethal evolution. 6 powerful, spring-like legs of obsidian silicon composite propelled it. It had no visible eyes, but a head dominated by a large, dish-like structure that constantly swiveled, sampling the air and vibrations. It landed silently in front of the skitter, and for a moment there was only the roar of the vent. Then the stalker's body tensed. A visible wave of distortion gathered at its dish face, and it unleashed a focused, concussive sonic blast. The sound was not loud to Aris's ears, but he felt it in his teeth. The targeted skitter's front 2 legs, struck by the invisible beam, shattered into a cloud of silicon shards. The stalker was on the crippled creature in an instant, its powerful mandibles closing around the soft, resonating chambers within the skitter's body. The symphony, for that moment, had a note of stark, brutal efficiency. Fascinating, Aris breathed, his scanner recording every millisecond. They don't just use sound to navigate or communicate, they weaponize it. They've evolved to be the conductors of death in this orchestra. Whisper said, confirmed. The Shriek Stalker's sonic blast is a focused, high-amplitude pressure wave. It exploits the brittle nature of the skitter's silicon carbide exoskeletons. As he delved deeper, the song of the core became more than just a background phenomenon. It became his map and his weather report. Whisper learned to correlate specific vibrational sequences with impending events. A quickening, staccato rhythm in the mid-range frequencies often preceded a minor steam vent eruption. A deep, drawn-out groan signaled shifting rock pressures, sometimes leading to a rockfall. He began to understand the skitters on a deeper level. Their tapping wasn't random. It was a constant, distributed sonar net, painting a picture of the cavern in sound, but it was also social. He witnessed what could only be called a gathering near a stunning brimstone cascade, a waterfall of molten sulfur that glowed with an unearthly orange light, filling the air with its acrid scent. Dozens of skitters assembled, their clicks and taps merging into a complex, rhythmic pattern that rose above the cascade's hiss. It was a communal activity, a sharing of information, or perhaps, Aris dared to think, a ritual. Whisper, are you recording this? The pattern, it's too structured, too musical. Whisper said, affirmative. The rhythmic sequence being produced by the skitter congregation bears statistical similarity to a primitive grammatical structure. It is a data-dense exchange. They are relaying information about resource locations, predator sightings, and unknown variables. Unknown variables. Whisper said, the pattern contains repeating motifs that do not correlate with any observed physical phenomena. Hypothesis, abstract concepts, possibly historical or mythological. Aris felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was witnessing the birth of a culture, one built not on sight or language as he knew it, but on vibration and resonance. He was an anthropologist of echo and stone. It was on the 7th day that he noticed the first, subtle wrong note. He was taking mineral samples from the wall of a smaller cavern, one noted for its particularly pure and harmonious resonance. The skitters here were usually active, their clicks clean and precise, but today they were agitated. Their movements were jerky, their tapping erratic and discordant. The deep, grounding thrum from the core, which had been a constant comfort, felt slightly off. It was flatter, strained. Whisper analyzed the core resonance. Is there a deviation? Whisper said, scanning, minor anomaly detected. The primary 7.1 Hz fundamental frequency has decreased in amplitude by 0.3%. Concurrently, a new high-frequency harmonic at 12.5 kHz has emerged. It is weak, but present. A new harmonic source. Whisper said, source, planetary core. The pattern is consistent with increasing pressure within a constricted geothermal conduit. Analogy, a whistle formed by pressurized steam forcing its way through a narrowing aperture. Aris placed his gauntleted hand on the cavern wall. The vibration was wrong. It was the same feeling as hearing a perfectly tuned engine develop a faint, worrying knock. It was a sound of stress. Keep monitoring it, Whisper. Log it as a potential seismic precursor. He tried to dismiss it as a normal planetary process, but a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. The skitters felt it too. Their discordant taps were not just random noise, they were a response, a warning. He looked around the cavern, at the beautiful, deadly, intricate world he was just beginning to understand. The symphony was still playing, but the conductor had faltered. The instruments were out of tune. And the wrong note was getting louder. Chapter 3: The Core's Scream. The wrong note did not fade, it grew. Over the next 48 hours, the subtle discordance Aris had detected swelled into a cacophony of distress. The deep, grounding booms from the planet's depths became sharp, erratic jolts that vibrated up through the Whisper's landing struts. The rhythmic groaning of rock, once as regular as a heartbeat, developed a ragged, tearing quality, as if the planet were being pulled apart at the seams. The skitters were the most obvious barometer. Their precise, communal tapping dissolved into frantic, disorganized clatter. They swarmed the walls of the main cavern in chaotic patterns, no longer mapping their environment, but seemingly fleeing an unseen terror. He saw them colliding with one another, their normally graceful movements reduced to panicked stumbles. The new harmonic, Whisper, report. Whisper said the 12.5 kHz harmonic has increased in amplitude by 400%. It is now a prominent, sustained whine within the acoustic spectrum. The core's fundamental frequency continues to diminish. Pressure readings from the lower cavern network are spiking beyond previous models. The song is no longer a status report, Doctor. It is a distress signal. Aris suited up, a sense of dread settling in his gut like a cold stone. I need to find the source. Can you triangulate the epicenter of this scream? Whisper said, affirmative. The distress resonance is most potent along a vertical conduit designated geothermal vent sigma. It leads deeper than previously mapped. The life forms are fleeing this area. Then that's where we are going. Aris checked the power cells on his sonic scanner and his suit's reinforced cooling systems. He was heading into the furnace. The descent was a journey into a dying world's agony. The air grew hotter, thicker with the smell of cracking stone and overheated metal. The magma veins in the walls pulsed with a frantic, stuttering light. He passed a brimstone cascade that was no longer a steady flow, but a series of violent, sputtering gouts, splattering molten sulfur across the cavern floor. The pious spires in this region hummed a painful, screeching note that set his teeth on edge. He found the shriek stalkers not hunting, but cowering in high crevices, their dish faces turned inward, emitting low, pained whines that were barely audible over the growing roar. The alloy ruminants had abandoned their grazing, their massive forms huddled together in a silent, stony vigil. After an hour of treacherous climbing down a near-sheer shaft, he reached the source. The chamber was immense, so vast his helmet lights could not illuminate the far walls, and at its center was the heart of the problem, a massive, pulsating geothermal vent, a gaping maw in the planet's crust that he instantly named the world valve. Or what was left of it. Superheated steam and pressurized magma should have been roaring from its throat in a controlled, powerful geyser. Instead, the vent was choked. Thick, congealed deposits of a hardened, glassy mineral sludge, a byproduct of the gallium streams and sulfur vapors, clogged its opening. The pressure behind the blockage was astronomical. The rock around the valve visibly bulged and cracked with each failed release, spiderwebbing with new fissures that glowed with hellish light. The sound here was unbearable. It was a physical assault, a tortured, metallic shriek of pent-up energy fighting to be free, mixed with the deep, agonized groan of the planet's core struggling against its constraints. The vibration was so intense that Aris's vision blurred, and he had to lock his knees to remain standing. "Whisper, my God." Whisper said, confirmed. The world valve is experiencing a catastrophic seizure. The mineral accretion has reduced its aperture by 92%. Can we blast it? Focus charges, something to break it up. Whisper said, negative. Blasting risks triggering a catastrophic rupture. The obstruction is too dense and too deep within the vent throat. The resulting explosion would be uncontrollable. Aris watched, horrified, as a section of the cavern wall near the valve sheared off and plummeted into the darkness, shaken loose by the violent vibrations. What are the projections? What happens if this fails? Whisper's response was chillingly calm. Projection, catastrophic seizure is imminent. If pressure is not vented, the world valve will rupture within 36 hours. Consequences are binary and lethal. Scenario 1, a superheated magma plume erupts vertically through the cavern network, vaporizing the Twilight Belt subsurface and triggering a surface-level extinction event. Scenario 2, the valve fails inwardly, causing a sudden pressure collapse that would suck nightside extreme cold deep into the core, flash freezing the entire cavern system. All life, including ours, would cease. A cold dread, sharper than the void of the night side, pierced through Aris's environmental suit. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a witness to a planet's death throes, and his own was scheduled for the same time. Options, there must be options. Whisper said, analyzing. The obstruction's crystalline structure is brittle to specific sonic frequencies. The core's current distress resonance contains these frequencies, but at an insufficient amplitude. Precise sonic disruption could fragment the sludge, allowing the building pressure to safely clear the debris. Sonic disruption, like the Shriek Stalkers. Whisper said, a similar principle, but on a planetary scale. We must utilize the cavern network itself as a resonance chamber. The required frequencies are known, the core is screaming them, but we must amplify them dramatically. A giant tuning fork, Aris muttered, his mind racing. But how? The Whisper's comms array couldn't generate that kind of power. Whisper said, proposal, utilize the shuttle cavern runner. Its engine resonance chambers and maneuvering thrusters can be modified to emit controlled, high-energy sonic pulses. You would need to pilot it through key resonance nodes within the caverns above the world valve, playing the required sequences to induce a cascading sonic fracture in the obstruction. Aris looked from the shuddering, screaming world valve to the frantic skitters scrambling on the chamber walls. He saw the entire delicate, beautiful, and brutal ecosystem he had spent days documenting facing utter annihilation. He was a biologist, not a geologist or a pilot for a suicide mission, but he was the only one here. It's a flying tuning fork through a superheated, pressurized, collapsing cave system, he said, the words tasting like ash. The plan was insane. The odds were infinitesimal. But the alternative was zero. Prep the cavern runner, Aris said, his voice firming with a resolve he didn't fully feel. Modify everything you need to, and whisper, give me the core's scream. Translate it into the target frequencies. I need to learn the planet's cry for help. As he turned to begin the desperate climb back to the Whisper, the scream of the core seemed to sharpen, as if it had heard him. It was no longer just a sound of geological distress. It was a plea. And Aris Thorne, the exo-biologist from a world of water and soft flesh, was the only one who could answer. Chapter 4: The Tuning Fork and the Score. The Whisper's hangar bay, usually a place of orderly silence, was now a cacophony of focused urgency. The cavern runner, a sleek, agile shuttle built for subterranean reconnaissance, sat at the center of the storm, its hull swarmed by maintenance drones. Aris, his face smudged with grime and sweat, worked alongside them, his biologist's hands clumsier with plasma welders and sonic calibrators than with bioscanners. Reroute the primary emitter coupling through the starboard maneuvering thrusters housing, he grunted, reading from Whisper's schematic on a floating data pad. We need to channel the pulse through the most rigid structure to avoid shaking ourselves apart. Whisper said, confirmed, modification in progress. The cavern runner's hull integrity will be reduced by 18% due to structural stress concentration. Heat shielding is being reinforced around the emitter ports. Aris stepped back, wiping his brow. The shuttle was being transformed. Its nose now sported a massive, bell-like emitter array forged from heat-resistant ceramo metal. Along its wings, the maneuvering thrusters glowed with a new, deeper blue, their resonance chambers retrofitted to produce controlled sonic explosions instead of mere directional thrust. It looked less like a shuttle and more like a weaponized musical instrument. "Whisper, show me the score again." The main hangar display lit up, not with a musical staff, but with a complex, three-dimensional map of the caverns above the world valve. 4 locations were highlighted, pulsing with a sickly yellow light, the resonance nodes. Whisper said, "Node 1, the cathedral, a large open chamber with stalactite formations. Natural acoustics will amplify low-frequency booms. Target frequency 18.3 Hz. Node 2, the flute, a narrow, highly reflective tunnel, will focus high-frequency energy like a laser. Target frequency 7.1 kHz. Node 3, the drone pocket, a small spherical cavern with perfect echo properties. Target, a sustained, modulating drone at 4.5 kHz. Node 4, the bell, the final chamber, directly above the world valve's throat. You must initiate a full harmonic cascade, replicating the core's own distress signal at maximum amplitude. Aris studied the flight path, a twisting, nightmare obstacle course through collapsing tunnels and superheated geysers. And the timing, the sequence. Whisper said the pulses must be fired in sequence within a 4-minute, 17-second window. This creates a cumulative resonant wave that will reach the sludge at the peak of a pressure cycle. Too early, and the wave dissipates. Too late, and the valve ruptures before the sequence is complete. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It was no time at all. It was an eternity. He moved to a separate console where Whisper had translated the core's scream into an audible format. He put on the headphones. The sound that filled his ears was pure, undiluted agony. It was a deep, tearing groan, the sound of a world being gutted, overlaid with the shrieking whine of metal under impossible stress, punctuated by sharp, percussive cracks, the sound of continental shelves breaking. It was horrifying. It was the most terrible thing he had ever heard. He listened for an hour until the vibrations felt etched into his soul. He wasn't just learning frequencies, he was memorizing a planet's death rattle. Whisper said, "Pressure buildup has accelerated. Projected timeframe until rupture 20 hours. The shuttle modifications are 91% complete." "No time for a test flight," Aris said, stripping off the headphones. His hands were steady now. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was being smothered by a grim, determined focus. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a paramedic for a planet. He spent the final hours reviewing the flight path, visualizing every turn, every potential hazard. He drank a nutrient slurry, checked and rechecked his flight suit, and performed a series of isometric exercises to combat the heavier gravity. He was preparing for a performance where a single wrong note meant extinction. Finally, the drones retracted. The cavern runner stood ready, its new modifications giving it a brutal, purposeful look. The hangar bay door began to cycle open, revealing the shimmering, heat-hazed expanse of the main cavern. The sound of the planet's scream washed in, louder than ever. "Whisper, final systems check." Whisper said, "All systems nominal. Sonic emitters at 100% capacity. Hull integrity at 82% of baseline. Life support stable. The sequence is loaded into the flight computer. You will have manual override for each pulse." Aris climbed into the cockpit, the harness automatically snaking around him and locking with a series of solid clicks. The control surfaces glowed to life. The planet's vibration was a constant tremor through the shuttle's frame. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne aboard the Cavern Runner," he said, opening a channel. "Initiating the World Valve Rescue Operation. No guarantees, Whisper, but it's the only song we've got." Whisper said, "Acknowledged, Doctor. The Symphony awaits its conductor. Good luck." Aris took the controls. His hands settled on the stick, his feet on the pedals. He took one last look at the Whisper, his tiny outpost of humanity in this roaring, dying cavern. Then he pushed the thrusters forward. The Cavern Runner dropped from the bay and plunged into the maelstrom. The turbulence was immediate and violent, a hammer blow of superheated updrafts and pressure waves that tried to wrench the controls from his hands. He fought it, his muscles straining, his eyes glued to the navigational map and the shimmering path that led to Node 1. The planet wasn't just screaming now, it was thrashing in its death throes, and he was flying directly into its heart. Chapter 5: A Conductor in the Maelstrom. The Cavern Runner fell like a stone into the abyss, then Aris pulled up, fighting the savage updrafts from the superheated depths. The shuttle groaned, its modified frame protesting the abuse. The world outside his viewport was a chaos of shuddering rock, billowing steam, and the hellish glow of magma. The planet's scream was now a physical force, pounding against the hull. Whisper said, "Approaching Node 1, the cathedral, 30 seconds." Aris's hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves, his knuckles white on the control stick. The navigational map showed a vast chamber ahead, but all he could see was a swirling vortex of superheated steam and dust. He fired the forward thrusters, cutting through the plume, and burst into the cathedral. It was aptly named. The chamber was immense, its ceiling a forest of colossal, humming stalactites. The air thrummed with a deep, almost religious resonance. This was where the planet's lowest notes were born and amplified. Initializing pulse emitters for Node 1. Frequency 18.3 Hz, amplitude max, he yelled, more to hear his own voice than for Whisper's benefit. He slammed his hand on the control. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, subsonic boom erupted from the shuttle's emitter array. It was a sound felt more than heard, a pressure wave that hit him in the chest like a physical blow. The entire shuttle shuddered violently. The stalactites above him began to vibrate in sympathy, their collective hum deepening into a world-shaking chord that made the very air seem to thicken. Below, on his linked seismic display, a section of the mineral sludge clogging the world valve shuddered. A web of fine fractures appeared. Whisper said, Node 1 sequence successful. Sludge integrity at 85%. Proceed to Node 2. Caution, turbulence, and debris increasing. Aris didn't need the warning. The successful pulse had agitated the cavern. Chunks of rock, shaken loose by the intense vibration, began to rain down around him. He threw the Cavern Runner into an evasive spiral, weaving between falling boulders the size of his shuttle. A piece of basalt screeched across his port wing, shearing off a sensor array. The hull breach alarm blared for a terrifying second before the self-sealing polymers foamed over the gash. "Some welcome," he muttered, pushing the thrusters to their limit. The path to Node 2 was a nightmare of narrow, twisting tunnels. The flute. The walls here were smooth, polished by millennia of abrasive gas flows, and they reflected sound with terrifying efficiency. The core's scream was funneled here, sharpened to a needle point that felt like it was drilling into his skull. Whisper said, approaching Node 2, activation must be precise. The focused energy will create a significant recoil. Understood. Activating pulse emitters, frequency 7.1 kHz. This time, the sound was a piercing, shrieking whine that felt like a scalpel in his ears. The cavern runner bucked violently as the emitter fired, the recoil from the focused sonic blast slamming it backwards into the tunnel wall. Sparks flew from the console as the starboard side of the shuttle scraped against the unyielding rock. But the effect was spectacular. The sound, focused by the flute's natural geometry, shot downwards like a laser beam. On the display, the sludge fractured dramatically, large chunks of the glassy mineral breaking free and being vaporized by the immense pressure behind them. Whisper said, Node 2 sequence successful. Sludge integrity at 40%. Structural stress on the world valve is critical. Expedite. Trying, Aris grunted, wrestling the controls. The shuttle was handling sluggishly, its systems strained from the abuse. Heat warnings flashed across his console. The ambient temperature was rising fast as the pressure below sought release. The journey to Node 3, the drone pocket, was a gauntlet of fire. He soared over a new river of molten sulfur that had burst from a fissure, the heat haze distorting his view. A sudden, violent pressure surge from the depths below sent a shockwave through the cavern, slamming the cavern runner upwards and nearly crushing him against the ceiling. He corrected, his body screaming in protest against the G-forces. The drone pocket was a perfectly spherical cavern, its walls unnaturally smooth. The sound here didn't echo, it sustained, building on itself in a continuous, modulating loop. The core's scream was a maddening, omnipresent drone. Node 3, emitters to modulating drone, 4.5 kHz, hold it steady. He triggered the sequence. A complex, wavering drone joined the cacophony, the cavern runner's systems straining to maintain the precise frequency. The sound made the rock around him shimmer, the very atoms seeming to vibrate in unison. He fought to hold the shuttle steady in the turbulent air, his muscles burning with the effort. The drone continued, second after agonizing second, grinding away at the obstruction below. Whisper said, sludge integrity at 15%. Pressure continues to build. World valve structural integrity at 5%. Hull integrity at 44%. You must reach Node 4. Aris cut the drone, the sudden silence feeling almost as loud as the noise. The shuttle felt like a wreck. Alarms were constant now, heat, hull stress, engine fatigue, but they were so close. He pushed the throttle forward, aiming for the final, terrifying chamber, the bell. The air ahead shimmered with heat distortion, a visible wall of energy. The core's scream was now a physical wall of sound, a roar that consumed everything. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a note in the planet's final, desperate song, and the crescendo was about to begin. Chapter 6: The Crescendo and the Cleansing Fire. The transition into the bell was like flying into the heart of a star. The heat was a physical wall, overwhelming the cavern runner's shrieking cooling systems. The air itself seemed to be on the verge of combustion, shimmering and distorting the view of the colossal, bell-shaped cavern. This was the throat of the world, the final resonance chamber directly above the seizing world valve. The sound here was beyond anything Aris had ever experienced. It was not just a noise, it was the pure, unadulterated expression of planetary agony. The deep groans were the sound of the planet's mantle tearing. The shrieking whines were the scream of metal and rock under stresses they were never meant to bear. It was a symphony of imminent death, and it vibrated through the shuttle's hull with the force of a physical battering ram. Whisper said, "Node 4, initiate harmonic cascade. Replicate the core's distress signal. Amplitude 200%. This will likely exceed the cavern runner's structural tolerances." Aris's vision swam from the vibration. Alarms were a constant, overlapping chorus: hull integrity, heat saturation, engine failure imminent. He could see the world valve below through the heat haze, a bulging, cracked wound in the planet, pulsating with a terrible, contained light. The mineral sludge, though fractured, still held, a dam about to break. "There's no likely about it," Aris gritted his teeth, his hands gripping the controls with a death lock. "Play the planet's pain." He entered the final command. For a moment, there was only the scream of the world. Then, the cavern runner unleashed hell. It was not a single sound, but a layered, synthesized cataclysm. The shuttle's modified systems took the core's own tortured resonance, the tearing groan, the shrieking whine, the percussive cracks, and amplified it, weaving the frequencies into a single, devastating harmonic cascade. The sound that erupted from the emitter array was the amplified soul of a dying planet. The effect on the shuttle was instantaneous and violent. Consoles shattered, spraying glass and sparks. The hull plates buckled, groaning in protest. A primary warning light flashed and then died as the system it monitored failed completely. Aris was thrown against his restraints so hard he felt a rib crack. The taste of copper filled his mouth. The effect on the cavern was biblical. The sound wave, focused and amplified by the bell's perfect acoustics, struck the weakened sludge plug with the force of a god's hammer. It didn't just fracture it, it vaporized the central mass. The pent-up energy of Ignis Secundus, held back for days, found its release. The explosion of sound from below dwarfed the cavern runner's emission. It was the voice of the planet itself, roaring back to life. A colossal geyser of superheated steam, shattered rock, and semi-molten sludge erupted from the world valve, a pillar of raw geological power that blazed upwards through the cavern network. Aris had a split-second view of the plume, a white-hot fist of energy roaring directly towards him. He didn't think, he reacted. He slammed the thrusters to full, riding the shockwave upwards, using the apocalyptic updraft to catapult the dying shuttle out of the path of the main eruption. The cavern runner tumbled, a leaf in a hurricane, spinning through chaotic, superheated winds. Whisper said, core pressure dropping, world valve clearing, resonance shifting. Whisper's voice was a distant, calm beacon in the maelstrom. The deafening roar began to subside, the violent, tearing vibrations smoothing into a powerful, steady flow. The terrible scream from the core was fading, replaced by a deep, resonant and stable thrum, the sound of a giant, finally able to breathe, sighing in profound relief. Aris fought the dead stick, his hands bleeding inside his gloves, his body a single, screaming nerve of pain. Somehow, he managed to stabilize the shuttle's tumble. It was a wreck, trailing atmosphere and fluids, its hull blackened and scarred, but it was flying. He pointed its nose away from the diminishing geyser, now a steady, powerful venting of steam, and began the long, limping journey back to the whisper. He didn't need the instruments to know it had worked. He could feel it. The vibration through the shuttle's frame was no longer a scream of agony, but a steady, powerful heartbeat. The song of the core had returned to harmony. As he approached the familiar ledge, he saw the skitters. They were no longer frantic. They moved across the cavern floor with their old, precise purpose, their tapping clicks rhythmic, harmonious, and interwoven seamlessly with the deep thrum from the core and the hiss of the settling steam. The shriek stalkers lay still on their perches, their bodies vibrating gently, no longer in pain, but in tune with the stable world. He set the battered cavern runner down with a final, grinding shudder next to the whisper. For a long moment, he just sat in the ruined cockpit, listening to the silence left by the ceased alarms and the new, profound music of the caverns. It was a melody of stability, of endurance, of a balance restored. Stumbling out of the shuttle, he fell to his knees, his gloves scraping against the warm rock. He placed a bare hand, ignoring protocol, against the cavern wall. The vibration was clean, strong. It was the heartbeat of a living world, grateful and resilient. "Log entry supplemental," Aris said, his voice raw and hoarse, but filled with a quiet, profound awe. He didn't look at the recorder. He looked out at the Ember Caverns, now glowing with a serene, pulsing light. "The event is over. The world valve is clear. We didn't fix it. We listened. We amplified its cry, and the planet healed itself." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the sulfurous air tasting like victory. The silence after the scream, it's the deepest sound I've ever heard. Ignis Secundus doesn't speak in words, it speaks in echoes, and today it sang of survival. He closed his eyes, letting the deep, resonant thrum of the stable Ember Caverns wash over him. The heat felt clean now, vital. The Twilight Belt held its breath no longer. It breathed with the steady, powerful rhythm of the core. The echoes now spoke of endurance, but as Aris sat there, feeling the planet's gratitude flow through him, he knew his work was not done. He had witnessed a crisis. He had to understand the system that caused it, to ensure it would never happen again. The symphony was playing once more, and he was now, irrevocably, a part of its composition.